Welcome to another episode of Beta Talk. This episode, you've just got me. And I'd like to thank my sponsors, who are Esby. They make them wonderful valves that people are using in heat pump systems. We have Wolsey's Renewable Centre. We have Primary Pro, who make the outside pipe insulation system. We have UK Radiators and Cast Rads, my two favourite radiator companies. And we have Payaka, which is a software platform helping lots of tradespeople. Thank you to my sponsors, because without them, I wouldn't be able to get my newsletter out and my podcast. So today, this episode is actually supporting a newsletter. So my newsletter so far, which populate my website, Betateach, they publish case studies. So I publish case studies of heat pump installations generally from that have been installed by master heat engineers that are in the Guild of Master Heat Engineers. And I also do industry insights where you hear me ramble on about what's going on in the industry. But I realised the policy people that we're all interacting with, they can't really reference the stuff I'm doing. They have their own sort of way of writing papers and reports. And once upon a time, I did a research degree back in the late 90s. So I got out my books and was reading all about social research. And I've decided to do some of the newsletters in the form of what can be citable, what can be referenced by the people I work with in policy. So they can read these reports and then cite them and reference them. So the latest newsletter is it's all about apprenticeships. It's titled "The Restoration of Craft Mastery: A Technical Position Paper on the Peripatetic Mentor and Peer-Validated Apprenticeship Models." Quite a mouthful, and I'll be explaining what all that means, what a peripatetic mentor is, and what a position paper is. So a position paper is where I'm giving my viewpoints, the viewpoints of Betateach about the apprenticeship and what I think is needed, where I think apprenticeships are going wrong. Apprenticeships is a funny word. Everyone's heard of the word apprentice and apprenticeships, and lots of people will have opinions about them. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who have opinions about them arguably don't know too much about them. They've not actually sort of worked in that space or worked with apprentices. So the position paper is arguing for a bit of a paradigm shift. It's arguing for something to be done different. We don't have to, you can test it. So we can test it with some guild master engineers, because there is definitely things going wrong with apprenticeships. One of the things going wrong is, so apprenticeships are funded. So the funding, the money, however that sort of filters down, some of it does go to the employer of an apprentice, but most of it is going to an institution. It's going to the college where the apprentice is being supposedly trained. Now, there are specific training centres that only teach plumbing and heating apprentices, and they're a little bit different. Arguably, they're way better than colleges. Now, this is not against colleges, and it's definitely not against college lecturers. I've been one. I've taught in 6 colleges, and there's some very amazing people that teach in these colleges. But colleges do have a massive problem. And what we're going to talk about today is a different way of doing things. So this whole episode is basically a layman's explanation of what my position paper is all about. And it argues that an apprentice, their primary learning facilitator, the people or the entity or the person that's teaching them the most is their employer. So an apprentice would normally be with their employer about 4 days of the week, and then 1 day a week they will go to college. And already we've got a problem there, because we've got apprentices going to college, and I get lots of feedback from people who've got apprentices and they're sending them to college. And colleges have been struggling for over 2 decades to get lecturers. I mean, sometimes they're not always called lecturers. We all have different names: instructors, tutors. But colleges do struggle to get them. So there's apprentices in this country that go that 1 day a week to college. And that week they might be getting taught by the brick lecturer or the carpentry lecturer. While the college is trying to find someone that's suitable enough to be a plumbing lecturer. And some apprentices have had, like, in 1 year, six different lecturers, because they start, they leave. You've got apprentices up and down the country going to colleges where they haven't got a lecturer, so they're twiddling their thumbs for that day, which isn't great. And the other big problem with a college, which is what the paper talks about, that they're an institution. So a college is a big sort of bloated entity. It's got a principal, it's got a senior leadership team, it's got higher management, middle management. Obviously, it's got senior lecturers, it's got lectures, it's got HR, human resource departments, it's got cleaning staff, catering staff, technicians that are in the workshop, it's got facilities. All these people have to be paid. And all these people are getting paid to teach an apprentice a particular craft. The other thing with colleges is, there's lots of things going on in the college. You can go there to learn health and beauty, catering, loads of courses. And so, middle management and higher management and senior leadership teams, they're not really worried about whether Johnny or Sarah are going to become good plumbers. They're worried about KPIs. They're worried about bums on seats and all these boxes being ticked. And it affects the outcome. What the outcome we want is, we want very good quality apprentices that are learning this important craft. So the position that this paper takes is that you don't actually need a college, and you don't. So if we go back to when apprenticeships first started, there was no colleges. The apprentice was learning off what's called the master. So we can go back to the statute of I can never pronounce this word, artificers in 1563. So we're going back all that way. So your apprentice would be with a master. So who is a master? So a master was someone that was obviously competent in their craft, and they had been peer assessed to be a master. And that's the important thing. There was no certificate saying that they were good. It was all the other masters saying, yes, you're a journeyman, you produced your masterpiece, we now consider you a master of our craft. You can now take on an apprentice. So apprentices were only with masters. So this is one issue we've got. Anyone can send an apprentice to college. So there's no law, there's no qualifications you need to be a plumber or a builder. You can set up a firm, you can be you could be working in a shop today, and then tomorrow think, I'm going to set up a plumbing firm. You can do that. You don't need any license to do that. You've just got to abide by the laws of the land. So you building regulations, water regulations. Obviously, if you want to do gas, that's a different thing. You've got to go and get essentially a license in that. But anyone can start up a plumbing company, which means you can send your son or daughter to college as your apprentice. Now, if the employer is actually the primary learning facilitator, you can see the issue there. So the apprentice is going to be learning kind of poor practice, bad practice, because the actual employer isn't that experienced themselves. So that's one big issue. Apprentices are generally going to be with employers that may not be up to date with current best practice. So that does become a bit of an issue, because if you're teaching them theoretical stuff that's aligned with best practice, and then they go back to their workplace and they're not doing that, that's a bit of an issue. We've got another issue with colleges. So in 1992, there was incorporated colleges. I think before 1992 were sort of local authority sort of entities. But in 1992, under the Further and Higher Education Act, they turned into independent corporations, where they arguably then concentrated on volume. They need to get bums on seats. It wasn't really about helping people to become competent in a trade. It's about bums on seats and then giving them qualifications. Now, these qualifications, these vocational qualifications, are known as CASLO, which is an acronym, CASLO, and it stands for Confirming the Acquisition of Specified Learning Outcomes. Now, this acronym was Ofqual. Ofqual are sort of in charge of qualifications in this country. They did some research into vocational qualifications, and they come up with this term CASLO. Confirming the acquisition of specified learning outcomes. What that means is when you're teaching people in a college, let's say you're teaching in the health and safety module. You're going to have to spend a few weeks doing your PowerPoints in the class, and then they have an exam, and they have to pass that exam. And what they're doing is passing these learning outcomes. So it's a bit of a tick box check thing. And the problem we've got is these students are learning theory that they can't actually relate to real life. So you'll have, let's say, a student is learning health and safety. So we have to teach them all about scaffold and the heights you put handrails, and when you put up a toe board, when you don't, and how that should be. These students haven't even been up at scaffold, so they can't actually relate it to the real world. When you start to teach things like the cold water module or the hot water module, there's loads of hot water systems. And of course, you're trying to teach them about these different types of hot water systems. They've never seen them, they've never encountered them. So they tend to rote learn so that when they sit in front of that computer and do that multiple choice, they pick the right answer. And I don't know what it's like now, actually, but every time I was teaching, they are allowed to take that multiple choice exam multiple times. So on paper, it says that they've mastered that particular module. That was a specified learning outcomes, and they've completed them. They've passed an exam. Hey ho, well done. They know all about hot water systems. Well, they don't really. They've just tried to remember the right answer. So let's use that hot water as a bit of an example. So there's lots of hot water systems. So when you're teaching these apprentices at college, you're teaching them hot water systems kind of fall under two categories: centralized systems and localized systems. And with both of them categories, you can then separate them into instantaneous and storage. So with a centralized system, that would be something like your cylinder, and that comes under storage. Well, you can have a vented system, you can have an unvented system. They can be electric heated with like immersions, or it can be gas boilers and cylinders. With localized systems, again, you can have instantaneous types, you can have storage types. With instantaneous, you can have a single point, you can have a inlet controlled, outlet controlled. There's so many of these different types of hot water systems, and these apprentices haven't got a clue, they've not seen them. And there's no context. Yes, you can take them into the workshop. You can trudge your apprentices, you're sitting with them in the class, you can trudge them into the workshop to sort of show them some of these systems. But when you do that, there's going to be another class in that workshop. These courses are chock-a-block. So when I was to teach in colleges, you generally would have about 90 students apply each year for the level 2 course. So I'd be teaching a class of 30, and let's say I'm trying to teach them about different types of cylinder, and I say, right, let's go and look in the workshop. I can show you a cutaway of a particular type of cylinder. Well, you can't do that. You can't just trudge into a workshop that's going to have 30 other students in because there's a health and safety thing. So these poor old students are trying to learn stuff they've just got no idea about. Now, a better way would be situational learning. So in my position paper, that obviously has to use lots of big words because it's for policy people to read, there's something called temporal contiguity. So what that means is if you can deliver theory on site. So the whole point of my position paper is to say you don't need a classroom to deliver theory. Theory is important, but you can deliver theory on site. So the paper is arguing for a peripatetic model. Peripatetic is one of them words I learned a few years ago, and it's one of them words I like, so I use it a lot. What it means is sort of going from place to place. So you can have a peripatetic mentor. So that's a high quality sort of lecturer who, let's say, is in charge of 5 apprentices. So on a Monday, they go and see Joe Blogg's Plumbing and Heating's apprentice, and on the Tuesday, they go and see someone else's. And when they turn up, they have a chat with the apprentice. It's going to be a day especially for that apprentice, and they can say, what have you been doing this week, past week? And the apprentice says, oh, we had to change out a cylinder this week. And then you can actually guide the student through all the theory around what they've actually done. So it's very situational. It's not abstract. So you can talk to them about, well, how did you find that hard? Was there any health and safety you had to think about when you did that cylinder? And so you can build health and safety into it in a sort of non-abstract way. And the student can sort of question you, and you build up this this bond with the apprentice, and you can teach them far better the theory because they're actually relating their theory to the actual work they've done. That does not go on in colleges because you're just literally working through one module, then on to the next module, then on to the next module. So you're teaching these students, these poor students are learning all the theory about cold water systems, hot water systems, and some of the time they haven't got anywhere near these particular types of systems. They just can't relate what you're trying to show them on PowerPoints to the theory. Whereas if you're teaching theory on site, which is possible, we live in this world of digital. We've got computers in our pockets. Some people say, "Oh no, you need a classroom to teach theory." Well, of course you don't. And it's taking away all the funding. So most of the funding is going to these colleges. So the position paper argues, why don't we just test something? Our industry is obviously now one of the most important industries on the planet. So why don't we just test a new system? Because the other problem we've got, when you have people in the policy world, some of these charities, some of these think tanks, or anyone actually involved in the heating industry, whenever they write about apprenticeship reform, there's a bias. And in the paper, in this position paper, I've called that institutional circularity. So what that means is task forces that get set up to sort of inform a report. Let's say a think tank's going to write a report about apprenticeships. They'll set up a task force. They'll start interviewing people. I've been interviewed loads of times on this sort of stuff. And the problem is, though, they're interviewing lots of people that are already involved in the apprenticeship system. So they interview colleges or people involved in awarding organisations like people in city and guilds and things like this. So you've already got this bias because the people you're interviewing are still purporting and trying to maintain a model that I don't think works. Now, it should be emphasised that there are people that work for colleges that do go out onto site to visit apprentices. So these are assessors, and they will go out to the apprentice. And the apprentice, over their course of training, is supposed to do some certain tasks. So the assessor will go out there to check that they've done these tasks and look at the photographic evidence. And then it will all be tick box. They'll tick box and write stuff in their portfolio, their evidence of working. But again, there's no sort of teaching involved here. They're just going out to see people who've done certain tasks. And if I'm honest, it doesn't mean people have done them tasks. It's very easy to stand in front of a cylinder or a bath, have your employer take a photograph of you, and you show that to the assessor, that you stick it in your portfolio. The assessor might ask some questions. Bob's your uncle. You've got your tick. And that's not the model I'm proposing. See, we've already got assessors that do go out to site, very rarely. Whereas what I'm arguing for is this mentor. So they're actually helping the apprentice learn theory out on site for that one day a week. And it's completely different to the college model. So in the paper, I've shown and illustrated the difference. So for instance, a college-based model, in colleges, these students work towards fixed theoretical modules. So you're going to have modules like you've got your health and safety. I'm going back to when I was teaching, so I'm trying to think of the module. You had something like effective working relationships. So that was all about, how do you interact with different people that you might find on site, like site managers, etc., etc. And of course, these students have absolutely no idea what you're talking about sometimes because it's not situational. You've got key plumbing principles, you've got science, you've got cold water module, hot water module, you've got an electrical module, you've got sanitation module. And you work through their modules, and at the end of each module, the apprentice is sat down in front of a computer and to do a multiple choice. Now, with the peripatetic mentor model, the one I'm proposing, it's flexible, it's experience-led theory. So you go out to site, you ask them what they've been doing. They might have been doing a bit of both, cold water and hot water. That's usually the case. They've got a cold to the hot water cylinder. So you then start to ask them questions about that cold water supply. What sort of pressure has it got to be? What sort of materials are you allowed to use for cold water? Because they are the ones that were working on it. Now, they might not have actually installed it themselves. They just might have been with their employer, just watching maybe and passing tools, but they were there at the job. So you're relating theory to what they've actually worked on. That does not go on in colleges. So in colleges, it's lecture-based delivery. So lecture, there's loads of research saying lecture isn't great for memory retention. Someone standing like me lecturing from the front, showing PowerPoints, people aren't going to remember that. Whereas the peripatetic mentor model, it's dialogic, logic and question led. So whoever the mentor is asking lots and lots of questions, and that you can ask obviously students questions in the college, but you're so time constrained, and you've got 30 students, so this is just one-on-one stuff. It's abstract content in the college. You're trying to teach them stuff they've had no understanding of, they've never seen it, they've never experienced it, whereas the peripatetic mentor model is contextualized, it's live content. So it's a completely different way of doing things, and theory is very, very important in this industry. And the way we are teaching it isn't good. It really isn't good, and no one's kind of able to change the paradigm, because all these reports being written about apprenticeships and training are involving the very institutions that deliver the training or qualify it. So you've obviously got inbuilt bias. So I want to give you some sort of more examples of how ineffective the college-based model is. So there's a bit of science that the students are learning. And again, some of the science can be quite complex. So let's thermal expansion and things like this. So they have to learn all about the linear coefficient of different materials. So things like copper and plastic, how much does that expand when it gets heated? Because if you're plumbing up lots of copper around a building, turning corners, internal corners, external corners, you have to be a little bit aware of when that pipework gets hot, it will expand. And so we teach them, it's maths really, and they haven't really got a clue what you're on about. They just remember stuff so that they pass their multiple choice. But if you're out there in the context, you're a peripatetic mentor, you've gone out for the day to visit this particular apprentice on a Monday, and they've done some pipe work. You can then talk about, how have you sort of accounted for expansion? If the pipe work gets really hot, have you got any measures in place to take up the expansion? And obviously, you're going to have to teach them the maths, but you're going to be able to do it in a way that's going to be relevant. It's not abstract to them. You can show them actually on site where there might be some potential problems with expansion. I mean, guttering was the obvious choice, because obviously plastic, as it will expand quite a lot when it's hot. Let's say you put your guttering up in winter, you have to account for the fact that in summer it's going to expand by quite a few millimeters. So that's why you have your expansion line inside your joints that you go up to. And again, when we used to teach this, there was no sort of relevance to the students, because they hadn't even done guttering. Most of them had never even been up the ladder or put it up, or the scaffold and put it up. So we're always in a college teaching people theory to stuff they haven't done yet. And it just means they remember it, or they might remember it for that particular day of the multiple choice. And remember, there's a lot of research around multiple choices. They're so easy to pass, because you get 4 potential answers. One of them answers is going to be absolute bonkers. Obviously, you've got the right answer. You've generally got another answer that's quite near the right answer, but the other 2 are not. So when you get that question wrong, let's say you've done your test, you get the question wrong, you're told what questions you got wrong, and you've got another attempt at it, you kind of know which one's going to be the right answer. But that doesn't mean you've remembered it. You've got absolutely no idea of the context, perhaps, of even what that question was about. You just remembered what the answer might be. You put A last time, you knew what you got it wrong with A, so you're going to put C this time. And this is how it goes. And you're in module after module after module, and you get a nice shiny city and guild certificate for each module. You know, they've caught on to the notion will give people as many certificates as possible. It makes them look good. I have done a post about city and guilds. I've been very critical of city and guilds over the years. Lovely people working there, but I'm critical of them, and they are in a bit of trouble at the moment. I don't know if you kept up with that news story. The Charities Commission is looking into them. They've done something. I haven't been keeping up to date with the story actually over the last few weeks, but that they make an awful lot of money from giving people certificates. And you, anyone listening to this, can take them people the very next day. And these certificates are basically saying, this is where it comes up to this cash flow terminology. You know, it's kind of saying that they've mastered all these different learning outcomes. Well, they haven't, because you could ask them loads of questions around that certificate that they've just been given, and they wouldn't know the answers, wouldn't know them at all. And this kind of goes on with things like the heat pump qualification. People go on that 3 day, 4 day course. You can question them 2 days later, and they will have forgotten nearly all of that stuff. And there's lots of evidence around people forgetting stuff. It's called the forgetting curve. A psychologist called Ebbinghaus was the first to sort of think about this, and then there was another psychologist after that called Bartlett. But and this is over 100 years ago, since then, loads and loads of research. If you're just around the fact that if you're just listening to someone, even if they're using PowerPoints, your brains aren't designed to sort of store everything. You're going to forget a lot of it. Whereas if you're doing what's called active learning, so you're asking the student lots of questions, which you can't do in a college. You can't individually go around to each student and keep asking questions because you're time constrained in a college. Remember, colleges basically want you to tick that person off and pass them and get more bums on seats and more funding. So the model I'm arguing for in this position paper is we don't need a college. You don't actually need a college. The funding should go directly to the employer and that peripatetic mentor who's going to be delivering the theory. And obviously, the employer and that mentor builds up a bond and a relationship. I mean, there's so many employers, so many plumbers and heating engineers are contacting me all the time. I'm in WhatsApp groups with some of them who are always moaning about their apprentices going to college. You know, my apprentice went to college this week and there was no one there to teach him. They just had to sit in the canteen all day. And of course, if the apprentice didn't go to college, they then get in trouble for not turning up because it's all about registration. I mean, that register is quite an important document in the college. And you'll have people phoning you up, oh, Billy wasn't in college today. And the poor old employer feels like saying, well, yeah, because I'd rather have him here at work because you've got actually no teacher to teach him yet. So they're so bizarre places, these colleges. They really are. Like I say, lots of wonderful people working there, all across the board, whether they're in senior leadership teams, management. You know, they're there doing a job. But the actual paradigm is broken. It's completely broken. We're not teaching masters anymore because we haven't got this master bond. I've talked about it as being a master bond in the position paper because that's exactly what apprenticeships used to be. You were apprenticed by a master, someone that was deemed competent. Now, there's no way we can deem competence at the moment, apart from sort of what I've set up this skill to, which is peer assessment. So just because you've got a City and Guilds diploma certificate, which is not a recognised qualification, and you've set your own plumbing company up and you took on your niece or your nephew as an apprentice, that certificate does not mean you're competent. So we've got incompetent people teaching our apprentices out on site. Now that might sound a bit harsh, but that is the reality. Um, and we're perpetuating bad practice. And it's things like this. Like I used to teach people about compensated control, whether compensation, no compensation for boilers to apprentices, but you just knew that they were going to go back to their employer. Their employers haven't heard of this stuff, and they're just putting boilers in on off. So you're teaching them theory around stuff that they're not working on, and they end up if they go on their own. You know, they get older, they're in their 20s, and they're now plumbing and heating, and they're doing exactly the same things that their employer did, and that's not to best practice. So the apprenticeship model at the moment perpetuates bad practice. Obviously, it would perpetuate good practice if the apprentice was with someone very, very good, and there's obviously some very, very good engineers out there. So the whole point of this position paper is to help policy people understand that there is a new way of doing things, and it's been written in a format that policy people can cite and reference, and that's the reason I wanted to do it. And I'll be doing a lot more of these types of papers because obviously I've got the advantage. I can ask the guild engineers, what's happening at ground level, and apparently this term ground truth is a term used in the policy world. So policy people, when they're trying to get information about this industry, they struggle knowing who to ask because historically they've gone to the big entities and asked them about our industry. Why wouldn't they? They've gone to the awarding organisations like City and Guilds to ask them about our industry. They've gone to our industry bodies, like the Chartered Institute of Plumbing and Heating or the APHC or the Heat Pump Association or the HHIC, or they go to the big entities like British Gas to get information. But of course, there's bias there. If they actually went to engineers that are deemed good by each other, peer assessment, which is exactly how it used to work back in the day. If you were a master stonemason, you were only a master stonemason because the other masters in Europe said you were a master. You were peer assessed. If you're good at something, if you're good at anything, other people that are really, really good at it recognise that competence. So the whole point of this position paper is to argue for a paradigm shift. You can test it. You can test the model works with a little sandbox. So you can just have, let's say, 5 master engineers, and they get funded to take on apprentices. No college, no institution involved whatsoever. This is a decentralised paradigm. This is a decentralised way of doing it. Now, obviously, funding is coming from the taxpayer. So there's all got to be sort of mechanisms in place to protect that. So that's up to the policy people to think about that. But let's face it, millions are being wasted every week funding. It is millions every week because it's not just plumbing and heating apprentices that go to college. You've got plumbing and heating, what I would call diploma students. So that there's thousands and thousands of young people going to college every year, enrolling onto college every year from school, who go on vocational courses, whether it's catering, hospitality, working in hotels, or whether it's bricklaying, carpentry, electrics, plumbing. But they're not getting the full qualification. They're not getting an MVQ. They've got no employer that's employing them. I mean, remember, that's a bit of a problem in our industry. Employers are quite reluctant to take on an apprentice, and quite right. It's a big ask for them because their insurances go up. It costs them money, and with plumbing and heating apprentices, there's an added extra problem. So if you're a car mechanic or you're a painter, you generally down tools at the same time every day, and you get your apprentice safely home. Because apprentices are only allowed to work a certain amount of hours a week, and you can't really keep an apprentice there to 9 o'clock at night. Now, in our game, plumbing and heating, sometimes you do have to stay late. If you've got someone, there's something, you've got a bit of gas leak somewhere, or you might have a water leak somewhere, or the sanitation, none of the toilets are flushing. You kind of stay there to get the job done. You can't just sort of down tools at 5, half 5, say, I'll see you in the morning. You've got to try and get the job done, which means your apprentice could be on site quite late. Now that's quite problematic because legally, you're not allowed to keep a young 16-year-old out till 9 o'clock, then drive them across London or wherever you've got to drive across to get them home. Which is why you tend to find most of the apprentices in plumbing and heating are going to be family members or very close friends to their employers. So most of the apprentices I ever taught were either employed by big companies or they were the sons or daughters of their actual employer. So this is actually an argument why, if we're going to test a decentralised way of doing things, let's do it with the plumbing and heating industry. Arguably, our industry is extremely important now. So let's just test this different paradigm in our industry. Now, there'll be people who will say, well, how do we know? In a college, that they've learned this, and they've done their health and safety module. They've done their cold water module, and it's all tick box. How do you know what an apprentice has learned out on site if you're delivering the theory out on site? Well, there's lots of digital tools nowadays we can use. We could have a digital competence ledger. So that's what I've called it in the paper. You can have GPS stamped logs. You can have video reasoning, so you can actually video your conversations with the student and chatting with them, professional discussions, and it can all be logged on a digital competence ledger. Now, in colleges, they do have digital systems. A lot of the lecturers don't know how to use them because they tend to get changed every few years. We're using a new system. I mean, this is going on in my daughter's school at the moment. One minute, us parents are used to seeing all their homework, etc., on one app that you had to download. Now they've changed the app, and we've all got. So you'll often find a lot of the people teaching in a college that they have to have these digital systems in place, but no one's really using them effectively. Whereas if you've got this one-on-one bond, you've got this peripatetic mentor, so they're mentoring the student, they're teaching the student theory, they've got a relationship, a really good relationship with the employer. So it's like this three thing going on. You've got the employer, the apprentice, and this mentor, and everyone's working together. And the mentor can be chatting to the employer. What do you think they're going to be doing this in the future? Or they show some real sort of. They seem to really like the electrics. Next time you've got your electrician out, sort of wiring up, get the apprentice to have a little look at that. And you can really work around what the apprentice needs to learn. Whereas in colleges, that is not happening at all. So yes, you've got a peripatetic assessor that will sometimes go out on site. And when I say sometimes get on site, I've known apprentices that haven't seen their assessor for 2 years. I mean, when my stepson was an apprentice electrician, obviously I was teaching at the time, so knew that industry inside out. And I would say to you, have you seen your assessor? Has your assessor been out? And I think it was 2 years before they saw their assessor out on site. Whereas with this model, the peripatetic mentor is going out once a week to visit that particular apprentice. So on the Tuesday, they'll go out and see Joe Blogg's Plumbing and Heating's apprentice. On the Wednesday, they'll go out and see Sarah Blogg's Plumbing and Heating's apprentice. And so they have an apprentice for every day of the week that they go out and see. So how do we license these peripatetic mentors? Well, there's some fantastic ex-lecturers out there or lecturers out there that are really good, who understand that the college model they are teaching within isn't great, argue it's crap. And you'd peer assess their competence with theory. So there's all sorts of ways you can do it. But the big problem we've got is at the moment, everyone talking about apprenticeships, everyone talking about reform kind of comes from the institution that's mucking it up. We need to get away from that institutional model. It never used to exist. Back in the day, hundreds of years ago, if you wanted to be a master swordsman, you spend all your days training with the master swordsman. You don't spend one day going across to a college and being taught by some lecturer in front of a PowerPoint who probably doesn't even really know what they're talking about. And that's another issue. That's another big issue in colleges. So a lot of the tutors, instructors, lecturers, whatever they call them, have actually never been out on site themselves and done the job. So I've taught people. So when you're to teach in colleges, obviously most of your cohort, most of your students are going to be in the 16 to 17, 18-year-old age group. But you do sometimes have what we would call mature students. So I remember teaching a nice gentleman. He's from the police. He'd kind of retired early from the police. He was still in his 50s, I think. And he wanted to carry on working, and he quite liked the idea of being a plumber or heating engineer. So he's come to college and he's doing his diploma certificate. And he quickly learns that the certificates, all these wonderful City and Guild certificates he will get, are not actually the full qualification. He's not got an NVQ. And to get an NVQ, it might be a tiny bit different now, but to get an NVQ, but back then, you didn't actually have to have an apprenticeship. You just had to show that you'd done some specific tasks with an employer. So anyway, this ex-copper, he loved the theory, 100% in all his exams, multiple choice exams, and he realised, the college approached him and said, "Yeah, would you like to teach it?" Now, to teach it, he would have had to have the full qualification NVQ. So what the college did was they put him with one of the other lecturers who still had his own company, self-employed company. He was still doing sort of jobs here and there at the weekends, and so that ex-copper would go out. I think he went out 5 times on site with this other lecturer on a couple of jobs. He didn't actually do the jobs. He just got photographed in front of the jobs. The assessors for the college ticked all the boxes they needed to tick, did all the photographs they needed to tick. He's now got his NVQ, and he was a teacher the very next year I taught him. So he's now teaching young people, and he might be good at it. He might be able to inspire the young people and get them to become critical thinkers and to know the importance of self-directed learning. I'm not saying he wasn't a great facilitator of learning, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of lecturers out there who've hardly done any of this stuff on site themselves. Now, with this particular model I'm proposing, the Paratechnic mentor won't be one of them people. It will be someone that does know this industry and also the theory. And obviously, the employer that's employing the apprentice is also going to be deemed competent by their peer network of other very good engineers. So we're going right back to how apprenticeships used to be. The apprentices with the master, so you perpetuate good practice rather than bad practice. So that's basically a little potted history of the apprenticeship system. This is sort of a podcast episode that goes hand in hand with that policy paper. So I'm sending this policy paper out on my newsletter, and a lot of my readers might not be from the policy world and will think, what on earth is all this about? So this episode is just designed to help you understand what this position paper is proposing. Thank you very much for listening.